I'm James, you're watching Earthwise Survivor, all about prepping and resilience preparation with an ecological mind for the collapse aware. And before you call me out on that video title, to be clear, I 3D printed connectors for a geodesic dome enclosure, which are the hardest part. The rest is just wooden battens and chicken wire or netting. So I didn't design these either. They're from a Thingiverse user called Tara Flannery. All credit to her, and you'll find a link in the description to download these connectors for yourself from Thingiverse. So this also wasn't my first attempt. We made one a few years ago that was 4 meters in diameter, and it's still going strong. This is the largest we've built yet though. It's 5 meters in diameter roughly, and the difference is massive. So as a broad overview, the concept of geodesic dome was popularized by Buckminster Fuller in the 50s, although technically he didn't invent it, he just patented it. It uses triangles to create a hemispherical dome, the advantage of which is that it uses very few building materials, creates a very strong structure, and is really wind resistant. Now, of course, they're not generally used for houses because of the funny angles and general awkwardness of working with triangles, but they are popular for things like enclosures of other structures. Most famously, just down the road from me is a series of interconnected domes at the Eden Project, which houses various biomes for exotic plants. If you're in Cornwall, it's a must visit. The total construction cost for the basic structure, not including any of the covering parts, is around 110 to 120 pounds. So that's 20 to 30 pounds worth of filament plus 80 pounds worth of wood and screws. That's really cheap compared to what a similar sized steel tube fruit cage enclosure would cost, and much stronger than a basic wooden box. Though I guess it depends on your local materials. Of course, if you don't have access to a 3D printer yourself, it would absolutely not be worth printing this, because you would have to use, say, a printing service. It would cost many times over that of just the raw materials. So how does it actually work? As I said, this is what's called a 2V complexity dome, which means it's made of only 2 different lengths of wood. The higher the complexity, the more vertices, the more triangles you would have. But for our purposes, a complexity of 2 is absolutely fine and the most efficient way of building, and it's really simple and quick to go up. If you go to the website linked in the description, Domerama, there's a calculator there which will give you the 2 lengths, the A and B length that you need for any given desired diameter, or vice versa. So if you know the lengths that you have, you can figure out the diameter you'll get. If you're going to be economical about this, then you want to aim to get those 2 pieces of wood cuttable from one longer piece. So you'll want to play around with those numbers for A and B until you can combine them to make the same length of wood that you can buy. For the 3D printed parts, there's 4 different components to print, consisting of 10 hexa hubs, that's these ones, so they have 6 connectors, 6 penta hubs, that's these with 5 connectors, 5 BABB and 5 BBAB connectors. The BABB, those ones, they go on the base of the dome, so they're the ones that are sort of cut in half and they sit on the floor. The hexa hubs have 6 connectors which are labeled, so that tells you which pieces of wood slot into there. The penta hubs have 5 connectors, they're not labeled because they're all A sides that go into this. I would recommend printing these in PETG, especially for larger domes like this. About half of these I printed in PLA just because I ran out of PETG, and some of them cracked very quickly. The PETG ones have been absolutely fine, but the forces are just a bit too much during construction at this size, for PLA at least. Once it's up and built, it's solid as anything with the loads distributed throughout each connector. But during construction, you'll have one long piece hanging on freely from one of these connectors, and it's enough to crack open PLA. It doesn't need to be 100% infill, not at all, especially with PETG, sort of 30 to 40% infill should be fine. Now, the only complication I had is that here in the UK, we don't get the exact wood sizes that are suitable for this. It's designed for nominal 1 by 2 inch size wood, which is actually 3¼ inches by 1½ inch big, don't ask why. And the millimeter to inch conversion doesn't help either. So in any case, the closest I could get to was some pieces of roofing batten, and even then I had to shave them down slightly at the end using a router. If you had more filament that you were willing to throw at this, you could feasibly play around and figure out the exact scaling size that you need to fit millimeter standards of wood, but I'd already printed most of them. Practically speaking, I think this is the largest you can go. As I said, 5 meters diameter, but If you're printing smaller and you wanted to use more of the space at the side, because it gets really difficult to stand up if you go smaller, for something other than a chicken enclosure perhaps, then one option is to just lift the whole thing up on some upright poles under each base piece. That would work. There's no complicated maths there. You just need to have the same size pole under every bottom piece, but you would need to drill holes or redesign the base pieces to allow you to fix them to those poles. Now there's two ways to go about actually constructing this, top down or bottom up. For a small dome, top down is probably the easiest because of the weight. It's not too much. So you make the top ring of triangles, then you lift up one side, build a triangle down and continue like that. In this case, we did bottom up. Because of the sheer size, it would have been impractical to keep lifting it. But in each case, you just insert a strut, screw it into the top and the bottom, then move on to the next one. All B struts all around the base. And then for the first layer, you're going to build a B triangle. So 2 B struts there, and then an A triangle, 2 A struts there. And then the entire second layer, so all in between all of these triangles, will be A's. In about 2-3 hours, you should have the whole thing constructed. The more struts you screw in as you go along, the stronger it gets. But another pair of hands to hold things is useful, as is a small scaffold tower. Now, you'll notice on this one that we have a door. Although Tara does have some door bits to print, I didn't find them all that useful, so I ended up just screwing 2 vertical pieces like that up right here and bodging the rest of it around that. It's not pretty, but it works. It's also not the only option for entry and exit though. On the back here, we also have a second door, and this one is even more bodged together. There's 2 hinges on one of the triangle's sides. Then I cut some spare roofing battens, strengthened them with a cross strut, and added some of this strong mesh. That helps to support it all together. And finally, another layer of battens. It's going to be more than strong enough. I just use a cable tie here to secure it on the inside. And at this side, with a 5-meter diameter, it's big enough to get in and out from easily. Smaller domes, a lot harder. So covering the dome, we used again some strong mesh at the base, buried a few inches to stop the foxes. As long as you're coming out every day, you don't need to be too careful with the burying bit. At least we don't. The foxes are quite lazy around here and they won't really bother to dig that far, not when they have easier food sources elsewhere. However, you won't just be able to unroll this mesh and run it all the way around the edge. You do need to cut it every sort of 2 triangles and then staple it on and do the next piece. Above that, we used some leftover netting from our fruit cage, a mix of fabric and plastic mesh. Just pulled it tight where we could and then cable tied it in. Since this one's a lot larger than the first one we built, we've just put an omelette egg glue cube inside to actually house the hens. I'll do another video of these hen house review another day, but on our smaller previous dome, we had an egg glue attached via its own cage on the edge. That's a better use of the space if you're limited. So our new hens are moving in next week, courtesy of the British Hen Welfare Trust. If you're in the UK, they're a great place to adopt battery hens or even free-range hens that are past their commercial viability, but still incredibly productive for home use. They have rehoming days up and down the country, and you only need to donate £5 to cover their costs. Do check out bhwt.org.uk. Of course, a dome like this is not a replacement for fully free-ranging your chickens, but if you're not around, the reality is that predators are an issue, so we only let them out into the wild when we're in the garden or we're around somewhere working. Again, a big thanks to Tara Flannery, who made these connector designs. It's pretty much the only viable printed dome design that I can find. And sadly, since 2017, when these were uploaded, she hasn't posted anything else. Thank you for watching. I hope this might have inspired you to print your own geodesic dome enclosure. Do hit me up in the comments if you have any questions or feedback, but I will gently remind you to read the instructions on the Thingiverse page and use the calculator at Domerama, because it answers nearly all of the questions that I've seen on that Thingiverse project from people who didn't read the instructions. Until next time, I've been James Bruce. You've been watching Earthwise Survivor.